All right, welcome to the podcast. I got the one, the only Chris Jackson over here. Today we're going to be talking about some crazy stuff that I never thought would ever happen in my life. At least not in a million years. We got two California sports teams that, oh man, this breaks my heart to say, but we got the Pac-12 conference I think is officially dead. We got UCLA and USC announcing a couple weeks ago that they were going to play starting in 2024 and be playing in the Big Ten conference. That means Midwest schools. That means snow in the wintertime. That means all the travel. Chris, what do you make of this, man? What do you make of this tragedy?
So first off, how's a SoCal kid? How's a kid from like Newport Beach or Huntington Beach going to deal with a Saturday in late November in East Lansing, Michigan?
Man,
Because
I
that's
don't know.
cold. That winter there, that fall is a little different than Los Angeles.
See, yeah, I mean, the crazy thing about this whole thing too is like we live in an area where a lot of our guys go to play sports at UCLA or USC or whatever because it's a California school, and they're not going to be playing, other California. They're going to be playing like Wisconsin's and Michigan's and like all these big schools. And you got these kids from California that are used to like 60-degree winter times, and they're going to be going to the frigid cold. They're going to be sliding in snow on the field. It's just I don't really know what to think of that, and like it's just crazy to me get these conferences and stuff that are just
Different. I mean, the whole Oklahoma Texas thing was a shock, but I think it fits, right? It's still, you can still say it fits because now A&M's in the SEC anyway. That fits culturally and everything. It's weird them not going to be in the Big 12, but UCLA and USC doing this, I remember, gosh, what was it? When all these conferences started to shift, when the Big 12 shifted, these
oh
teams,
yeah.
Missouri moved, A&M moved, West Virginia went to the Big 12. But then there was that talk of, heck, San Diego State to the Big East. I remember that was a thing when they were going to join that. And we're thinking, what's a San Diego State like Temple game going to look like? San Diego State,
Yeah.
Virginia Rutgers, Virginia Tech, or whatever. So there's
See,
that. But now you've actually got it on the biggest stage to where somehow a USC and UCLA are going to play Ohio State, Michigan. I'm not sure how the divisions are going to work or if they're going to do these divisions anymore because none of these conferences are going to try to get away from this. But how's the schedule going to work? It's the football part. The travel's okay from what coaches have said, but it's the other sports too where that's going to be weird, like
oh,
basketball,
especially in baseball, you
football,
try playing 3 days a week.
especially these sports when you don't have the private charter flights. You've got
Yeah.
commercialized flights. So that's just going to be a pain.
See, I think the worst part about this whole situation too is like you really, if you really delve deep into why this happened, like UCLA got Lincoln Riley from Oklahoma, another, Big 12 school. And
Yep.
then all of a sudden you get USC, the team he's coaching now with their new quarterback who is at Oklahoma. Now they're going to the Big Ten just because of one move that they made. And then it's like the prominence of the conference. And then you look at like these other schools like San Diego State's probably going to be a Pac-12 team now because they're a good football school. They're, pretty solid at what they can do. But then you have schools like Arizona and Arizona State that have good other sports. But because a football program is probably the most dominant program in college sports, you look at that and you're like, are they screwed? Are they going to have to be stuck in a crappy Pac-12 conference? Are they able to move up to a Big Ten conference? Like, how does that look? Like, what's going to happen there,
There's so many things that just like a what if. Do four of these teams, six of them go to the Big 12 and
Yeah.
join that? Does the Pac-12 just add to both these conferences stay stagnant? There's so many things like that, but what if the SEC adds more teams, like a
Cool.
Clemson goes there, a Florida State goes there, the Big Ten decides to add more? But we'll see what Notre Dame does. I think that's the next like domino effect if they want to stay independent or not. For years, we've always said they got to join a conference, but they never have, and it still worked for them. So what's the incentive now? But
Oh yeah.
I don't know. It's gonna take a while to get used to USC against Iowa.
Oh, that's
Like
going to be a weird one. That's
every
going to be
other
so
year,
weird.
USC against Michigan State. Like this isn't it's not the Rose Bowl. That's
Yeah.
like that's a classic Rose Bowl matchup, not October 15th or November 3rd.
It's weird to me. I do think the biggest thing though about this whole situation is you do look at the fact that these schools are going to a bigger conference like the Big Ten and all that. Their prominence as programs are going to grow. So if you look at, because they're going to get all that money from ticket sales and all that stuff. You look at that, and the tuition is probably going to go up a little bit because they're going to be a Big Ten school. So I think it benefits the school in the long run, but it's like, what does the Pac-12 conference really stand now? Like all these schools that have incoming guys going to a Pac-12 school. Like you look at Arizona, just got Kylan Boswell reclassifying for 2022. He's going to be there playing basketball in the Pac-12 conference. But then you look at these other guys that probably aren't going to be one and dones, and they're going to be stuck there for multiple seasons, right? And then it's like, what happens next? Like they're playing crappy Pac-12 schools, not getting the competition that they thought they would get. And then if they're trying to go pro at their sport, it's like not going to work as well because they're not playing as good teams. So I think it really, really, really jeopardizes the conference state as a whole. And I think that's the biggest thing that I think people, really rings the bell when you hear the two most prominent California teams are leaving. That says a lot about what they think of the conference right now, if they're just willing to travel that far to play.
I mean, money talks, right?
Money does talk. Money, yeah.
Everything now, especially with this. That's why Texas and Oklahoma go to the SEC. It's not like the Big 12 money was bad, but the SEC's is that much greater.
Oh yeah, I was expecting that move too. That's the crazy thing. Yeah. I was expecting that to happen.
I mean, it's not like the Big 12 you're struggling. I know the revenue that goes in there is big, but the SEC is a different beast. You get that exposure. You're with these other teams, Alabama, Ole Miss, everybody else that brings in, all this money every single year, these boosters, endowments.
Yep.
Then you go to the Big Ten, it's different money too, with the Ohio States, Michigan States, those fan bases, and the TV network deal is better because the Pac-12 network is not on every single provider. I haven't had the Pac-12 network in years because of providers. I don't have it on YouTube TV. I didn't have it on Comcast when we had Comcast, AT&T.
Oh yeah.
I think Sling TV, I had that in college, and I had the Pac-12 network, but that was the only time I had that, and I was on the East Coast for college. So it just it didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. And you want the money, you don't want to fall behind in that arms race for all that money. There's NIL now, and you want to keep upgrading facilities and doing the best things you can.
Yeah, it's all that exposure too. You look at all these schools now, like you said, with the NIL deals. If these players are getting the chance to make all that money playing at a Big 10 or Big 12 school or SEC, and they can do it, by all means, do it. Like it's not like, if you see these Pac-12 games are on at 7 p.m. on a Saturday, right? No one's really going to be at home watching TV on a Saturday night if they're in college. So it's like, is it, from a business standpoint, it's a good move. Like I don't fault them for that. It's just being a Pac-12 person who goes to a Pac-12 school and just knowing like what the state of the conference is going to be, knowing that you have these big programs like the basketball, Arizona and UCLA is not going to be a thing anymore. And that was a big thing this past year with the Pac-12 tournament and like the regular season battles that they had. Like it's just it definitely takes away a big component of just such a storied conference that's been a historic conference for so many years. And that just, it takes away as not just a fan, but as a reporter, as, a bystander, anything. If you're not actually a player in that conference involved with the schools, like it definitely takes away from the competition of that conference, knowing that you're losing two of the biggest schools.
And the travel's different for fans. You got to think about that too. The rivalries, you lose out on some rivalries because
you do.
A&M left the Big 12. You lost Texas against Texas A&M and there's been some. I mean, they still replay those games pretty much every single day on TV. I just scroll through and see the Longhorn Network's got something, ESPNU's got something, whatever it is. You lose those. You lose these regional rivalries. Great. It's great that USC and UCLA are going together, but heck, I was kind of looking forward to seeing Oregon and USC kind of battle it out for the next 4 or 5 years and see how that goes.
I mean, yeah,
and it's the money, and this money also helps fund every other sport too at the same time. That's one of the positives out of it, I guess you can take away.
Yeah.
I love tradition. I love the rivalries. That's what I was growing up on every Saturday. That's what I was raised on. You get up and you watch every single rivalry. You watch the Cows and Stanford, Notre Dame's against USC, Notre Dame, Stanford, what heck, you name it. Like there's a million rivalries in college football regionally, but you're going to lose out on some of these.
Yeah, it's tragic. And then you look at, if you think about it, like the next schools to leave Pac-12 are probably going to be Stanford's probably gone, because if you look at them, they got their baseball programs, as good as they are. They have a pretty solid football team with, their history. So they're probably gone. Oregon's probably gone, and in baseball too. Like if you look at the baseball side of things, you got Stanford that was good. That's good in the Pac-12. You had UCLA was pretty good. Is pretty good in the Pac-12. Cal's pretty solid in the Pac-12. Oregon State is one of the better teams in the nation. Arizona is pretty solid. Arizona's like the Pac-12 as a baseball conference is a good conference, and in basketball too. So if you take away that because of the football programs, you're also, because I think that that's the main driving force behind these moves. If I'm not, you have the football programs being what they are there and they're moving. Now you bring in the two other sports, baseball and basketball, right? Those sports are now in a situation where it's like the Pac-12 was such a competitive conference in those sports. Now that those teams are gone, it's like you have a whole realignment and the conference is not going to be the same anymore. It's not going to have competition anymore. It's not going to be a threat to any other conference. Like you look at these conferences, the Pac-12, in my opinion, correct me if I'm wrong, but they're no longer going to be a Power 5 conference in sports. That conference, I think, it still will be considered one because of the name of the conference. But if you look at the teams, they're not going to be anywhere near the level of the other conferences now because of what just happened. And I think that that's a huge, huge, huge loss because of all those West Coast teams those West Coast people that rely on Pac-12 schools to go to after they graduate.
So what is it going to be now? Is it going to be Power 2 conferences? Is it gonna be Power 3? But it looks like the SEC and Big Ten would reign, but would there be a third power conference? Would the Big 12 snatch teams up? What's going to happen to the ACC?
If you, like you said, Notre Dame, right? I think that Notre Dame is going to join the ACC because I think in 2020, when it was a short season, they were playing ACC teams. So I think Notre Dame, a school like Notre Dame, will go to the ACC, and you'll see a lot of teams go to the ACC. You'll see some teams go to the Big 12. Obviously, teams are going to the Big 12. You'll see teams go to the SEC and the Big 10. I think those conferences are fine. I don't think those conferences are in jeopardy because in the grand scheme of things, all those conferences have similar skill sets in terms of players and teams. Even Notre Dame is not far behind all these other schools, right? So those schools are going to be playing in those big conferences. The Pac-12 has always been a conference. The problem with the Pac-12 I've noticed is they've always been left behind. If you look at all these other conferences, everyone's always said it's the other conferences, and then the lowest of the low for Power 5 is the Pac-12. And that's why I think these other teams are fine. I don't think they're going to go anywhere. I think the only conferences you're really, really going to see like teams go out of at this point is Pac-12. You're not going to see teams really leave SEC, Big 12, Big 10 necessarily. Maybe they'll interchange, but they're going to stay in that realm. It's going to, those conferences are set. I think Pac-12 is the only conference you'll see teams are going to try to dip and just go somewhere else.
I think that's better for the average fan, that classic fan, if you still have at least 4 conferences. That's where it gets weird. I'm okay with one conference kind of shifting away. It's not the dream scenario, but at least if we get a lot of these teams in the Big 12, at least there's still some regional stuff happening. It's not terrible travel. It's not like going from Utah to Stillwater's exactly that bad of a trip going from Utah to Oklahoma State or anything like that. But a lot's going to change. You got to be proactive, not reactionary in college football. And now is the Big 12's time to be very proactive and snatch teams up. And the Pac-12 wants to stay alive. They better be proactive. And
they're gonna have to
reactive, or else that's when your conference is gonna die.
Yeah, and if you're a Pac-12 school, right, and you're like a coach for the team, how are you recruiting kids now? Like, since like a big pitch that a lot of schools can make is, the competition is going to be this, and this. Now that you eliminate, you're going to be eliminating 2 big teams like that, and then it's going to probably trickle down after that. If you're a recruiter, how are you getting kids to come to your school? Like, how are you getting these athletes to commit themselves to play a Pac-12 sport, knowing that they're not going to be playing the teams that they, were used to, that they're accustomed to playing? Like, what do you do on that? That's the big thing too.
I think you've got to be unbelievable at finding diamonds in the rough. You got to be great at that. You got to be great at player development and leaving your culture. The problem is with the transfer portal, there's not as much patience anymore to stick around. And if someone doesn't play their first year or first 2 years, they're likely out the door in a lot of situations now. So you better be good at that. You better hope you start making these Boise State waves they had, or what TCU did 10, 12 years ago. And look what happened. TCU went from the Mountain West and moved into the Big 12, and now they've got all this more money. Their facilities look great. they're in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex with all that talent in a Power
Yep.
5 conference, and that's helped them. So you better hope that you can start building like that. And look
Yeah.
at what Boise State's done with that. Look at what Oklahoma State's done, always been consistently good, and every few years get yourself up to the top. And but right now, if you want to not get left behind, you got to figure out these next couple of years. You better be good.
Oh yeah.
Now is the time. We're such a, what is it? What have you done for me lately? Society, instead
Yeah.
of what have you done for me the last 30 years? What have you done for me the last 30 minutes?
Yeah.
So be good if you don't want to get left behind, and
Yeah.
proactive. And if you're Oregon, you're Washington, Stanford, their football struggled the last couple of years, but they've got that national brand. Most
Oh
sports,
yeah. They got
they're so
and Andrew Luck there for
yeah,
crying
they're
out
so
loud. You know,
great
they got that history.
yeah, right. They're so great academically. You're not going to say no to a Stanford.
And their baseball team is so good at that school, it carries them pretty much. You know, you look at what they've done in baseball the last few years. They're a college World Series team every year. You know, they're on the national stage of baseball. A lot of pros have gone there. So, you know,
The only Pac-12 school I have legitimate concern for is Cal. That's the one where I have a lot of concern for right now.
I think Cal's fine. And I'll tell you why. Not because their athletics are great now necessarily, but because of who they've produced athletically in their past for all sports is what's going to be the driving force. You look at in baseball, right? They've had some major leaguers come out of Cal. They've had some NFL players come out of Cal. You know, the basketball team, Jason Kidd was there, right? You've had guys like that. So, and the thing that's really sad, I noticed too, with a lot of these teams, a lot of it is historical based, right? You look at all these programs, right? Like San Diego State is a great example. They're a team that was 11-1 10-2 a season ago, right? But historically, they haven't really done, like, in the grand scheme of things, historically, they haven't really done a whole lot. So are they really going to move up? Or like, I don't, you know, Cal's a gray area team, like you said, because of where they are now. But I think based on what I've seen in the conferences, a lot of teams that have that historical edge, if that makes sense, are going to be the teams I think they're going to be given either more leeway or more consideration. But in my opinion, I think the team that's really screwed for the Pac-12 is Utah. And the reason why I say Utah,
You think Utah?
not because they're a bad program, but because if you look at, they're the newest Pac-12 team, right? It's like in a workplace, right? If you have a bunch of people that have been there, but then you have the newest employee, that newest employee in the event of a firing or layoff is the first to go. Utah was the most recent team to join the conference, right? And in the conference, despite the fact they won it last year in football, they are probably, out of all the Pac-12 teams that are there now, either them or Colorado, they're the most irrelevant teams in that conference, I think. So if anything, I think Utah and Colorado, they're going back to the Mountain West, possibly. I think you move San Diego State to the Pac-12, and I think you have some realignments kind of going like that. But I think you know, screws a lot of stuff up. It really does. You know, these athletes are going to be, California kids are not going to want to play at UCLA anymore, knowing they're going to be playing in snow in November. So, you know.
Now, here's the thing, though. I'm not concerned about Utah because here's why I'm concerned about Cal. All these last 5-6 years, I looked at the TV ratings. Cal's not really in the top anything for Pac-12 viewership, and that's going to be the driving force for networks too. It's so ESPN and Fox based. What's Fox going to get the Big Ten, right? That's their thing. The SEC is what, ESPN, especially now that I don't think those afternoon games anymore. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that big 3:30 Eastern kickoff that they're having, I think that's ESPN now, I believe.
Oh yeah, it is. It's ESPN.
That's
yep.
what it is too. I think a lot of it's still going to be television based because that's what this all is, and that's my concern for a Cal or a Washington State or an Oregon State. But Cal's the one where they're just not.
Oh yeah, it's the viewership too, because, you know, obviously, like I said before, I go to a Pac-12 school, but like the Pac-12 teams play at 7 p.m. like on a Saturday night. And a lot of people I talk to are like, well, I don't know if I don't really want to watch a college game at 7 p.m. on a Saturday night when I could be going out or doing other things. And these schools that, you know what they can do and know what they are as programs, they want to be seen. Like, they want to be watched on TV. Like, they work hard to put out their product on the field, and they want to be, you know, seen. So I think that the merit that UCLA and USC had of going to a different conference because of the, time of the games and stuff. I think that was one of the biggest factors of doing that as well. Like, I agree with you on that because, who wants to watch a game at 7 p.m. on a Saturday versus 12:30 on a Saturday when, you could do other things on a Saturday night. So it's one of those, definitely one of those situations for sure.
And the Pac-12 network corrects that. So if you're an FS1, at least you're pretty much in most households. Maybe you got a night game, right? Or you're on ESPN2. I know I've watched ASU on one of those ESPN channels. Like, at least you're everywhere. Pac-12 network, the problem is too, there's such little viewership there because it's on in maybe half the networks now because of certain deals that have happened or whatever. But here's the numbers I just pulled up from 2019 in terms of most. I haven't been able to find the latest 2 years, but just 2019 is pretty recent. And I think it still speaks to the programs and how good they are. As Oregon, then most watched team in 2019, 47.7 million, USC 23.6. I think USC's obviously going to go up now with Lincoln Riley, Caleb, and moving over from Pitt. But Utah was third, Washington was fourth. All the way down at the bottom, Cal 7.3 million, Oregon State 1.9 million.
See, that's the thing too. It's all a matter of just like the discrepancies there are crazy. Like, you just look at the amount of love that those LA schools, but that's the thing too. It's also a market size too. Like, even the pro teams, right? You never have to worry about the professional LA teams having any sort of issue with money or anything because there's such a big market just for every single sport they play. Like, they have two teams for each professional sport there, pretty much. It's like, even college sports, like the market in LA is so unfairly big that it's like you get all these people from LA watching them. Plus you get like NorCal people because that people in NorCal also like UCLA and it's like the viewer, it's just California as a whole. It's just the discrepancy is crazy for the amount of viewers the many more followers you get of the teams there. Cause it's just the market size too, that really helps you out. Like, now USC's just got Lincoln Riley and they're going to be like, everyone's going to want to play there. It's going to be ridiculous.
Yeah. And the market size helps so much too, because it's not like Rutgers has been historically great at football or anything. They had Ray Rice and they were a 6-6, 7-5 team then with him and Greg Schiano as coach, but they brought in the New York market being in Piscataway an hour out. And that's why the Big Ten brought in Maryland too, because you're not far from the DMV from DC and Baltimore.
You
can have a lot. And
it's the market size, man. I'm telling you, like, that's why San Diego State's market is so small, because that's such a small school too. Like, you look at the school size, like, they're such a small school. It doesn't matter how good of a team they are every year. Like, they're such, like, I feel bad for these small schools, man, because some of these schools are really, really good at their sports, but they're such a small institutions and they're so, like, they don't have just the resources to really get out there like they should. And it's just the business side of things on this. It hurts a little bit in the sense of, like, what are you going to do? Like, if you go to, even if you are a good school athletically, like, what are you going to do knowing that your market size is so small that you can't move up anywhere? It's just such a difficult situation to kind of be in. And I think it's just hard for these athletes too,
Yeah, it is. You look at them, I feel bad for them, for a Fresno State. As great as Fresno State's fans are, because there's not a pro team there, right? I know you put on one of their bigger games every once in a while, they've got that stadium packed up, but how are they or San Diego State really going to move the needle for these television networks to be in a Power 5 conference? Unfortunately, I also think that we got to give these coaches credit for having a lot less resources to work with, and still every year they are consistently better than some of these Pac-12 schools and developing better players out of it. That's a credit to them for ever doing that.
All Fresno State's got to say is that they had Derek Carr and Devontae Adams. I'm pretty sure they'll make it. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, right. And then look at what they did with Jake Haener, that crazy comeback last year against UCLA, where Jake Haener was, what did he have happen? He hurt his ribs or whatever it was, but he couldn't even move that final drive in that UCLA game. And he leads that crazy comeback.
Yeah, it's just,
I mean, I don't want to lose these moments.
I
understand the money, but I just never want to.
I do think, though, the thing that really, the sports world nowadays, to me, I think, is flipping upside down in the sense where, like, college sports, I think, should be more of a sentimental thing than a money thing. I know that that's not something that it is nowadays because, everything's the business side of sports and all that. But because these programs represent universities that kids pay money to attend and they go for the rest of their lives, they will always support these teams. I think it's way more sentimental to have that consideration than, like, let's say, a Seattle Seahawks coming from the AFC to the NFC, right? Back in 01, right? I think it's more of it's a lot sadder to me seeing these college teams get realigned when they've been in the same place for that long, when there's that sentimental value to what conference they play in and who they've produced and where they play and, like, the rivalries and stuff. Because these rivalries are storied. Like, they've been playing, UCLA, USC. These rivalries have been a thing for what? Like 100 years, right? So it's like, you got to just, teams got, I think the business side of sports should not really be reserved for college. And I know that's kind of a thing that you don't really, think about in 2022 and everyone's a money hungry person, but, like, I don't know. I think college sports need to have more of that sentimental value than I think any other sports because of that university connection that these teams represent and have for each other.
You definitely do. And if I was an AD, a school president, chancellor, I would 100% make these moves that these schools have.
Oh, yeah.
I completely get it, but I want to see the other side of this too, because in Oklahoma, right? You had Oklahoma and Oklahoma State freeze. Look at that state. Not really a pro football team. Now you got the Thunder there in basketball, but still you have all these kids growing up wanting to be a Sooner, wanting up to be an Oklahoma State Cowboy. You have all these different states. You have Pitt, Penn State, Pitt, Virginia Tech, West Virginia Pitt. We lost West Virginia Pitt and Virginia Tech for 10 years. Now they're bringing that back as non-conference foes, but that still doesn't feel 100%, right?
It doesn't.
It does. Losing Texas A&M and Texas hurts. It's just these different things. And I grew up a college football guy. That was my thing. I grew up raised around that with family ties to college football. That's how big it was for me. And I don't want some of these kids to lose that. I don't want to get lost because of. I get it. I understand business, but I want to see the other side of it too. And I feel for some of these kids that grew up dreaming of being that Michigan guy. They dreamt of being Oregon. I mean, just honestly name any of these schools and you'll have that Ole Miss, Mississippi State, right? You can go up and down the list, but that's where I feel like, because I think there's such a sentimental value to that college football, like you said, to where you beat your rival. And even if you lose every game, but you beat your rival and you spoil their season, that feels pretty dang good.
Yeah, no,
Right?
absolutely.
It's just a different beast. Sure, we've got pro sports teams, but not every state has a pro sports team. There's only 30, 32 pro sports teams in each sport.
Yeah.
That's you're still some of them. Some of these states have multiple teams. So that's half of America doesn't even have.
Oh yeah.
a
No,
pro
yeah.
sports team.
So I want to conclude with a thing that I was thinking about. What I want to do is let's talk about predictions for how we think UCLA and USC are going to do across sports in their first year in a new conference. The reason why I say that, and the reason why I'm thinking about this is because this, like, let's back up a second. Let's think about how teams like UCLA from 2021-22 basketball season, how that team you think would do in a Big Ten situation, because you look at the roster that they had. They had Tiger Campbell, Johnny Juzang, Jamie Jaquez. Like, they had a really, really, really good team. And they're a bunch of athletes, and a lot of them, and a couple of them did go to the NBA. So, and you look at the Arizonas as well with basketball, right? They had 3 guys go pro. Like, how would those teams do you think, going up against Big Ten schools? Because Arizona and UCLA dominated the Pac-12 because they were the only 2 teams in that conference in basketball. But then they went to the tournament, and then they started playing, SEC schools and Big Ten schools and Big 12 schools. And you saw what happened. They couldn't handle it. So, I mean, how do you think these teams are going to fare in their first year in a new conference?
The record won't be as good as strong because there's more competition, but at the same time, I think that can help you going into the postseason. Yeah. I think it could be. Look at what the Big 12's basketball's had these last couple of years. Baylor and Kansas, and you're playing Oklahoma one day, Texas the next, TCU's still a good program. Texas Tech, what they've had these last 4 or 5 years with Chris Beard, now to Mark Adams. And even if your record is not like 25-8, if you win 18, 19 games as an 11 and you're a 10, 11 seed, 8, 9, whatever it is, you're still a threat because you're battle tested. chances are with that record, you've still probably beat some good teams and you've probably lost to some really good teams and probably let some slip away. But I imagine the close games, that experience, right? Doesn't competition, the saying's always been competition breeds success. How many coaches have we heard that from
Oh yeah,
growing up
absolutely.
sports, right? I think
Every
that
sport.
in the long run, it could help you as long as you hire the right people though to be your coaches at the same time is going to be the big
Yeah.
thing. But I think
See, yeah.
you're like UCLA and Arizona. I remember when there was Lonzo Ball, you had him at UCLA. Arizona had Alonzo Trill. I remember those
Yeah,
big
they
games.
had the Nico Mannion days and like
Yeah,
all that, the DeAndre Ayton type,
those were big days. It's going to be different because there's going to be more tough games. Now you got to play Michigan State one night, Michigan another time. You got Ohio State. You got sure Indiana hasn't been the same, but you still got to go to Assembly Hall. You got to play Purdue, who's always good. It's going to be tougher, but I still think it could make you better. And I don't know, maybe it helps you recruiting
Oh yeah,
nationally.
no, it does.
Locally, maybe it changes local recruiting a little bit, but at the same time, your brand's going to get out there more because you're on television more, and that's never a bad thing.
So yeah, I will say though, I think it's going to expose a lot of these programs, like issues and stuff. The reason why I say that is because you look at in March Madness, right? The worst Pac-12 team in basketball would not like didn't even come close to making the playoffs. But then you look at these other schools, like Indiana was one of the worst teams in their conference, I guess you can say. But they still made March Madness. They still had a good run. So a lot of these conferences, the worst schools in their conference are still playoff teams, are still top playoff teams. So, you put but then you add in like USC, UCLA, and then they start playing those teams that were the worst teams in their conference originally, and they're probably going to get smoked the first couple of years because also size too. Like I think each conference as well, not just in basketball, but in every sport too, it's size. Like the players' size definitely is different with each conference. The bigger the conference, you get guys that are bigger in size and stronger, more athletic. So I do think that for the first couple years of them being in a new conference, you're going to definitely see that. You're going to see the size discrepancies. You're going to see these players struggle to keep up with, a Texas player or an Oklahoma player who's been in these big conferences before versus a Pac-12 guy who's, maybe not accustomed to that competition. But, you never know. I mean, I think that it could go either way. I think that with Lincoln Riley at USC and Nick Cronin at UCLA for basketball and Chip Kelly and all these coaches, I think these guys have experience at really high levels and stuff. So I do think that there's going to be a lot of positives, but I do think, like I said at the beginning of this podcast, man, the Pac-12 conference is dead. 20, however many years, you could put a grave on it. 2022, the death of the conference, because man, this conference is done. I don't see how this conference is going to come back now at this point.
It doesn't sound good, and I do like your argument about the size because it is a different beast. It took Texas A&M a while to go from that Big 12 differences, right? The air raid, sling it out the way it's been to the SEC. Those big boys up front, and then those big receivers, big defensive backs. Now you're going to have some of these Pac-12 teams play against these Midwest Iowa corn boys that are big, beefy dudes down low, and they're going to run it up the gut, and they're going to throw a fullback at your butt, a tight end, an H-back, everything else up at you, and you got to get used to that. Now, I think Lincoln Riley, if any coach could do it, it's him because Oklahoma's when he was there, they were always physical. I mean, that's credit to their offensive line coach. Bill Beanball was there for years, but they were always physical. They intimidated you at the start of that game with their size. I think if there was a guy that can do it, it's him.
And they got that speed too. Think about that. They had Kyler Murray as their quarterback. They had CeeDee Lamb as one of their receivers. They've had some speed. They've had some athleticism. Like he's going to be going to a school. And plus he got his quarterback too coming with him. So we'll see. I mean, I'm personally being the fact that they still get 2 more years in this conference. I'm going to enjoy every last second of it. I got 1 more year left at my school, so I'm hoping that I can see some good competition for a little bit longer. But now that I know it's going away, you got to really just enjoy it. It's like going to a candy store and just buying all that candy. You got to enjoy it as much as you can for as long as you can before it goes away and you can't do it anymore. It's one of those situations, but we'll see what happens, man. We got a couple more years before the big change, so we'll see what happens, but
and hey, USC being relevant and being good has never been a bad thing for West Coast college football. It's never been a when they were at their height, what was every kid watching at night? They were watching Matt Leinart, Reggie Bush. Gosh, who was the Lendale White was with Reggie Bush too. You had another big running back there. You had all those guys.
Carson Palmer days.
Yeah, it's still USC being getting relevant. It's still good for the West Coast. It's still really good for California. And there's no shortage of talent that USC can pluck from 5 minutes away and get a 4 or 5 star to go there and get plenty of them and be at the top of the recruiting rankings.
Hell yeah.